Hello again. Welcome to our next lecture on the Prajnaparamita as part of early Mahayana. For this lecture, I want to consider the Jataka tale that occurs at the end of the sutra. Jataka here is used to imply that it is the story of a former life. These ideas in Buddhism that we have lived many lifetimes before. In this case, a really wonderful story which is added to the sutra. I say added to the sutra. We feel in general from the study of the text that this Jataka, which only appears with the 8,000 line version, is an additional story which was floating by itself, totally independent, about two bodhisattvas. And the reason for adding it was to answer one of the questions. How is it that a bodhisattva, how should a bodhisattva practice the perfection of wisdom, the Prajnaparamita? The answer is that a bodhisattva should, or anyone who's trying to follow the perfection of wisdom, should do it like Prajnaparamita did. Now, Prajnaparamita, which is a long name, means ever weeping. Prajnaparamita is the hero of our Jataka tale, and Dharmottagata is his teacher. The story has different formations depending on which translation you find it in the Chinese. There's a very early version, which I think is the best, the 2nd century one, but the one that I have shown you primarily comes from the 5th century with Kumarajiva. So here we are asking the question, how shall we practice perfection of wisdom? And we enter into the story of the ever-weeping bodhisattva, and we are told, you should do it like this one. The story, as I have studied it, really is a traditional journey of a hero. And I point this out in order to say what I'm trying to do with this lecture. In this Jataka tale that we find at the end of the sutra, I think it gives us an indication of the location of the story in terms of the geography, and that where we're going to find this story is tied to the Eurasian myths, legends, cultural patterns, architecture, art. All of it is in this. And it goes all the way to Greece, comes all the way across Eurasia. And in this story, I have looked for examples to say that this one is in the Northwest. Now, you'll remember in an earlier lecture, I said, there's always been an argument as to where Mahayanas and Prajnaparamita starts. Is it in the Northwest or is it in the East Coast of India? In this case, the story which we are about to explore, I believe, shows enough signs that we can say it belongs to the Northwest. So that's why the first indication is that this is a hero journey. Sadaparudita, the ever-weeping bodhisattva, has to go on a journey. And he has to face all the dangers and problems of that journey. And his journey is going to take him to find the prize, the golden fleece. In this case, the perfection of wisdom. And in the heroic legends of Greece and to the West, the hero always returns home and brings this great prize with him. The implication in this Sadaparudita is primarily the journey outward. So as he journeys, he has to go through certain stages in the heroic motif that we find across Eurasia. First of all, as we look at the motif, the hero has to awaken to his destiny. And in this story, it's really wonderful to see the slow awakening of Sadaparudita. In this sense, he is like this Eurasian hero. He awakens. His first experience is that he seems to be completely blank about his destiny. But then in a dream, a voice speaks to him that says, you must find the Dharma, the teaching. He's called ever weeping because throughout his awakening, every time he is stimulated to a new level of comprehension about his destiny, there's a difficulty and he can't work his way through it. And he just sits and weeps because he can't figure out what to do about it. So in the dream, he wakes up and he doesn't know what to do about it. Well, where can I find this teaching? How can I get it? And so he weeps. That is, he's sorrowful. He lives in a time when there's no Buddha. He lives in a time when he has nobody to teach him. All this is brand new and he doesn't know what to do about it. So then, instead of just a voice, he gets an image. And the image is of the Buddha. And slowly, as he awakens, first he just hears the Buddha. And then he begins to converse with these visions of the Buddha. So he's awakening like a hero. So we have in the text, O Subhuti, while Sadaparudita Bodhisattva was in sorrow and weeping, an image of a Buddha appeared before him, praising him, saying, excellent, O gentle son. In the past, when the Buddhas practiced the Bodhisattva path and sought for Prajnaparamita, they were just as you are now. So Sadaparudita is awakening to his destiny, which is to practice the path of the Bodhisattva and to find the Prajnaparamita. That's his journey. That's what he has to do. And he has to be awakened to this, to know that he has to do this. He's finally told, if he will just follow the directions and take the journey, he'll be able to hear Prajnaparamita. And then it's very interesting because in Kumarajiva, we have the additional thing about writing, as I've said before, that the Mahayana and the Prajnaparamita text have introduced writing. So he's told, you will be able to hear Prajnaparamita either from the sutra text or directly from a teacher of the Dharma. He hears that. And then the Bodhisattva again begins to weep. And he asks himself the question, how can I find this? How can I do it? Finally, the Buddha gives him the Buddha images that he's conjuring up. As he awakens, he is told, go east. So, first of all, having seen that this is a heroic motif journey, then we can say that certainly comes from the western part of Eurasia. The Greeks had this heroic legend. So did many other people across Eurasia. Now, when he's told, go east, then the question is, if you're told to go east, what does that mean? It usually means you're in the West. And so if he had been on the east coast of India told to go east, it would have been into the sea or over to Myanmar or ancient times Burma. But in this case, I think that the go east implies that he was in the Northwest, and going east was to go toward the homeland of the Buddha, the Gangetic Plain. That this was a way of saying to the people in the Western regions that if you go across the plain of the Ganges plain to the homeland of the Buddha, that's where the message comes from. So even though the story is in the Northwest, it's very interesting that it tells us that in order to get Prajnaparamita, you have to go east. And so that implies that we're looking at something that's being taught in the Western regions, and the implication is you move toward the east. Then that gives us another hint about geography. Then the text tells us, O gentle son, the palace of the Bodhisattva Dharmagata is located on a high terrace in the city of Gandavati. The city is 50 miles in length and breadth, constructed with the 7 treasures in a harmonious blend of colors. It is surrounded by 7 tiers of walls built of the 7 treasures, and each tier contains a row of 7 treasured trees. This is a description of the structure, of a city's structure. And where do we look to find this? Well, it goes on to say, the avenues and streets are extensive. They're attractive. This sounds like urban renewal. They're orderly as a picture. The bridges are broad. They have bridges. The canals are clean. Water is brought in through canals. It's like a woven mesh. That is, it's like our streets and avenues laid out in a square. And high over this seven-tiered city, there are the towers of Jambunada gold, where each and every tower has a row of 7 treasure trees bearing many varieties of precious fruits. Fantastic description of where the hero needs to go to this incredibly fantastic city. So what does this tell us about the location of the story? What is described can be said to be very close to what is called a ziggurat. It says, as we said, 500 leagues from here is a city called Gandavati, constructed of the 7 treasures, and this 7-tiered city is 12 leagues in length and breadth. That is, it's a square surrounded by 7 palm trees made out of the treasure of jewels and gems. It's prosperous, pleasant, peaceful, and its population thrives. So where do we find ziggurats? We find them, of course, to the west of India, in Mesopotamia, in what's now Iran, Iraq. And what is a ziggurat? It is a stepped pyramid. And there were 7-tiered stepped pyramids that were the palaces of the kings. But also, in a sense, these were cities that large enough to contain a large population. So what we have described about Saraparudita's journey is we have the ziggurat that was in Mesopotamia or the Persian area, just to the west of India. Again, an indication from this story that it would be in the Northwest where people would understand what a ziggurat is. And it's a description of this. Not only are these tiered cities and palaces, but we have, if we go farther west, the Hanging Garden of Babylon. And that is tiered cities, 7 tiered city walls, and they were planted. They had these gardens. The Hanging Garden of Babylon isn't what we read for how he describes Gandavati. It would be exactly almost what you could see if you could go to the Hanging Garden of Babylon, which people believe at one time was a structure, was a way of urban life. So what I'm pointing out here is, first of all, we have a heroic legend, which goes all the way back to the Greeks, at least, and beyond ancient times. And we have the description of a city which is like a ziggurat or like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. All of this to the west. So these are indications that the geography of the story can be set from our research. Now, the next thing we have is an understanding of why cities, why the city, why the description of these terraces, these levels. So, O gentle son, after Dharmagata Bodhisattva and the attendant maidens have played and amused themselves, the Bodhisattva teaches Prajnaparamita 3 times a day, every day. This is a remarkable statement. The great teacher which he is looking for, this great teacher is a householder. He is a householder bodhisattva. So in the morning, or whenever there's time, Dharmagata lives a life with all his wives and family. He lives even a sensuous life. But then 3 times a day, he begins to stop this sensuous life and teach. So in the city of Gandavati, the men and the women, young and old, gathered together, and they've set up a Dharma throne for him to use. Now, this throne is like a terrace. The throne rests on 4 feet of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and crystal. It's covered with cotton and woolen cushions of many colors, a white blanket of cotton placed on top. The throne, 5 miles in height, is decorated with a canopy and curtains. As an offering to the Dharma, at the 4 sides of this terrace, they scatter flowers of the 5 colors, burn a great deal of fine incense, and on this, Dharmagata Bodhisattva sits upon this throne to teach Prajnaparamita. So, where do we find such terraces? These square terraces on which there are temples or there are even cities built. And again, it's to the west. Uruk in the 3rd century of before the Common Era, with the digs, we find these square bases upon which they built temples, cities. We still have what would be the leftover remains of such tiered cities, like at Assur, which dates to 2000 BCE. That indicates that when we hear about the throne in which the Dharmagata sits, it implies that you have an elevated terrace, a lot of decorations. It's a very special place. It's the place from which the king rules. And in this case, instead of the king, it is the Bodhisattva Dharmagata teaching the Prajnaparamita. So I think one of the greatest terraces that I've ever seen is the one at Persepolis. It is a terrace on which Darius had his court and the famous staircase that leads up to the terrace, so that the people who came from many countries to pay homage to Darius ascended to his terrace, going up this great staircase. And on top of this terrace, you can see the structures were built. The reason why I bring this up is that what we find with Dharmagata teaching on such a terrace is not something that we would find in India. In India, the Buddha taught sitting on a mat on the ground under a tree. Later on, they elevated him and started putting thrones that were elevated, as we can see on the second picture. But this whole idea of that the teacher is in this large square terrace that is so specially built, this belongs again to the West. So this is another example of how looking at the story of Prajnaparamita and Dharmagata, we have something which is not the eastern portion of India, but belongs to a cultural pattern which is found to the West. Now, another indication of a Western influence on the story. I have to go for this one to the first translation of the Ashta, done by Lokshema in 179. He was a Parthian. And in his story, he has a very interesting reference to making an image. And he says, if there is someone who has seen the Buddha in person, then after the nirvana, he remembers the Buddha. That is, he remembers how he looks. And because of this, makes an image. And these images, which are made by someone who actually saw the Buddha, are upright and handsome. And this is a crucial point, they perfectly resemble the Buddha. This is portraiture. So where do we find portraiture? Well, King Kanishka, who reigned from 127 to 140, made coins with himself on them. And on the back, he put an image of the Buddha. That was from the Greeks, that you would have a portrait of a ruler on one side of a coin, and on the back, a deity. So King Kanishka ruled in the Gandhara region in the northwest, Kushan Empire. And what he did with coins and with portraits were directly coming from the Greek influences. The Greeks, I think, were the ones to introduce into the Buddhist tradition the idea of a portrait. What is a portrait? Well, on money, we mainly see it with the late Queen Elizabeth. If you follow her career on coins, her portrait appears, and as the years go by, they keep it as an exact portrait of her age. She ages on the coins. And that was true for the Greeks. In order to make a true portrait, it has to keep up to date. So in this way when they talk about making an in the image of the Buddha by someone who has seen him alive and makes an exact image of him. This is something which I think is Western. This is the Greek idea of portraiture. The Indians and many other people had images, of course, and they had ways to make human figures and human faces. But portraiture is quite a different thing. Now in China, if you go to Xi'an, you see hundreds of these warrior figures, and they are all human models. That is, they are actual model faces after human beings. So there was an idea of portraiture, even in China, I think, from an early period. But it is also, in portraiture, it implies that a portrait is a snapshot of a particular moment in the life of somebody. As we know, we go to a photographer and they take a picture of us. It's just a snapshot of what we looked like at that time. And of course, as centuries and decades go by and you look back at your own picture, you think, wow, did I ever look like that? So portraiture is exact replication of a snapshot moment. And so the Buddha image is implied that somebody saw the Buddha when he was upright and handsome, which meant he wasn't in his old age. He was still an active, vibrant person, and they make an image of him. Again, this is an indication that the story of Dharmagata and Sadaparudita points us to the West, points us to the Eurasian patterns of art. And I don't think that you find the idea of portraiture in the Indian art, which is one in which you can learn how to make a face, you learn how to make an image. You don't need a model to sit there for you. You don't try to make it look exactly like somebody. It is a generic face. So this is another. So I pointed out that we begin to see all these signs that the story of Sadaparudita can actually be identified by geography, that was taking place in the Northwest, that it showed the signs of the heroic legends that came across Eurasia, that it had the notion of portraiture of the Buddha. And through these, we can also see that there was reference to ziggurats, we think, 7-tiered stepped pyramids. That's what a ziggurat is. If you look at Borobudur in Java, that's what it is. It's like a ziggurat. It is a stepped pyramid. It probably has its origins from the ziggurat taken by the maritime merchants to Bali. So, to Java rather, this is where we are seeing another indication of a pattern in this story. We're still within the story of Sadaparudita. Now, Sadaparudita runs into trouble. he's told to go east, and he's told how, and he sets off, and then he doesn't know how far to go, and he's told, and he finally figures out how far he needs to go. And then halfway through his journey, he runs into another problem. He says, oh dear, I don't have a gift for Dhammakata. How can I approach such a magnificent teacher with nothing? I can't do it. But I don't have any money. What can I do? And so he says, I know. I will sell my body. I will ask anybody, will you buy this body for some purpose? The gods look down and say, do you think he means it? And then we have a whole other story that enters into it. One of the gods changes himself into a Brahmin. And he says, yes, I need blood and marrow of the bone to make my sacrifice to the gods. Will you give me the marrow out of your bone, and will you give me your blood so that I can make a blood sacrifice to the gods? And so Jataka starts to hack away at his own body in order to have a gift to give to his teacher. Up in a tower, that is a fancy house, the daughter of a merchant looks down and sees this handsome young man down there cutting himself up into pieces. And she says, good heavens, that's not right. And so she goes down and she says to him, sir, what are you doing? Why are you cutting yourself up like this? And he explains to her, I need to hear the perfection of wisdom. But if I get all the way to my teacher who's going to teach me Dhammakata, I don't have anything to give him as a gift. I can't do that. And she said, well, stop cutting yourself up. Look, I'm rich. My family are merchants. They're very rich. I'll get together a fantastic gift for you if you just stop cutting yourself up. He does. The Brahmin says, well, do you want to know who I really am? I'm a god. I was testing you, that's all. And so in one version, Prajnaparamita says, fine, put me back together. And he does. So now we have the hero journey continues. The hero has to undergo a terrible test. He has to even test whether he's willing to give up his life for the journey he's taking. And Prajnaparamita meets this. The merchant's daughter, true to her statement, her father is a great merchant. She puts together a great caravan of 500 horses and camels, loaded down with all kinds of gifts and gems. And she says, but I'm going with you. I too want to hear this message. And she sets off with him. Now, Carl Jung studied the heroic legend, and he wrote about it with Amor and Psyche. And in Amor and Psyche, Amor is the masculine, and he's so intense that he is self-destructive. And he needs the feminine psyche to come along and temper what he's doing and to say to him, don't kill yourself for pity's sakes. Here, I'll help you. That is also in the heroic journey. The hero must have some help when he faces a terrible thing. And where does he get that help? He gets it from a woman. A feminine figure must step into the heroic journey and save the hero from self-destruction. And we find this perfectly outlined with Dharmodgata and Sadaparudita, where Sadaparudita, the ever-weeping bodhisattva on his journey, when he's about to cut himself to pieces, is saved by a woman, the merchant's daughter. So that's why the merchant's daughter immediately descends from the tower, went to Sadaparudita and asked, oh, gentle son, why do you inflict such pain on your own body? Why is it that you need blood and marrow? And he has to explain to her, I've got to have it in order to make a gift to my teacher. Well, we know that in the Northwest, not only was there the heroic journey, but there was a very famous motif, which we know of as the King Shibi Jataka. And in the King Shibi Jataka, the king says, I vow to save all beings. The gods look down, and we have the test of the hero here. The gods look down and say, do you think he really means it? So the two gods said, okay, one of us will become a dove and one of us will become a hawk. And the dove will fly to the king and said, save me, save me. And the hawk will come to try to kill him. And that scenario is done in King Shibi. So instead of Sadaparudita, we have the dove who is about to be sacrificed to the hawk. So when the hawk flies down, the king grabs the dove and holds it in his arms and says to the hawk, no, you can't have this one. This dove I'm protecting because I have vowed to save all sentient beings. And now comes the test. The hawk says, well, king, how about me? I can't live if I don't eat. And I can only eat flesh that's newly killed. You just took my food from me. And you're killing me. I'm going to die because I don't eat. This was my meal. King thinks, well, I can't kill one to save one. What can I do? And then he thinks, I know what I'll do. I will cut off my own flesh. I will break my own bones and I will feed this hawk. So he says to the hawk, I'll give you my flesh. It's been newly killed. They'll all be right. The hawk, which is the god in disguise, says, you know, it's going to hurt a lot when you start to cut away at your flesh. So you will not give me very much. I want an equal amount of your flesh to the weight of the dove. Fine, says the king, bring on the scales. I'll make sure I cut off that much. So out come the scales. But then, of course, the gods make the dove heavier and heavier. And no matter how much flesh King Shibi cuts off to put onto the scale, it never equals, until finally he looks at it and he says, I have tried through lifetime after lifetime to finally reach enlightenment, to finally reach the state where I can save all beings. And I've always failed. And here I am failing again because I can't have enough, I can't cut off enough flesh to equal the weight of the dove. So then what he does is he throws himself, his whole body, into the pan and gives his life theoretically to this. Then the gods say, very good, you passed. We're just testing you. And in the King Shibi Jataka, they say to King Shibi, what do you want? And in that story too, he says, well, for a start, put me back together. And they do. So this King Shibi Jataka, which is a story very famous in the Northwest, is now incorporated into this story of Sadaparudita and Dharmodgata. So when the maiden tells him, good son, I will provide you with whatever you need. And then she outlines all the things: gold, silver, gems, lapis lazuli, which only is found in Afghanistan, crystal, amber, coral, all sorts of precious gems, flowers, perfumes, parasols, garments. I'll give it all to you so you can make offering to Dharmodgata, Bodhisattva. The heroic journey then is, in one sense, complete. Sadaparudita is now in the presence of Dharmodgata, and he has all these gifts to give him. And then comes the teaching. And I tell you, it's really a wonderful story to read because it's one of the few places where you have long passages that are said directly to be the teachings of a bodhisattva. Mainly in the sutras, as you know, we have arhats, Shariputra, Subhuti, Maudgalyayana. All of these are arhats. The Buddha is an arhat. But in this story, Dharmodgata is a bodhisattva. And he teaches and shows how a bodhisattva teaches. So what I've done in this lecture is to try to indicate to you that we can take a story and look at all the hints as to where it might be being told. Where would it be told where people would understand the issues that are presented in the story? Because a good story must be understood by those who hear it. And so when the Bodhisattva, Sadaparudita, makes his heroic journey, it appears that the story that we have arose in the Northwest, in the area where the Greeks had lived, in the Kushan period, at the turn of the century, turn of the Common Era rather, and that this story, this heroic legend, allows us to see that perhaps we can, in some cases, use the hints and make a clear designation of where the story was told. Thank you very much.